Hey everybody, it's Extinction Agenda James here. This is a thing that I recorded a long time ago. I had intended to begin a series of things. Individuals who I talk to will know that I had talked about this in the past. I was like, I'm doing this thing, but then life always has other plans, and my own brain had other plans. I get pulled in other directions. Everything seems very, very interesting to me until it doesn't. And I should know better. I should know better than to talk about something. I should just do it, and when it's ready, release it. I think it's Mark Millar disease, or perhaps Grant Morrison himself disease, or their self-disease, who announces many things that don't come to fruition. So, perhaps it's incredibly fitting that this recording about the Invisibles is part of a series that never got completed. Maybe now that I'm releasing this, though, it will be completed. Let me know what you think, or don't, or whatever. But I think there's some stuff in here. I think there's a worthy something. Enjoy your weekend.
I think the honorable thing for our species to do is deny our programming. Stop reproducing. Walk hand in hand into extinction. One last midnight, brothers and sisters opting out of a raw deal.
We do not trust any friends or family members. I repeat, do not trust friends.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's that time again. It's time for the Invisibles, not the War Journal, for anyone who knows what the fuck I'm talking about. I've been wanting to get back to this project for a while. Now's my chance to do so, and my intention is to tackle themes and issues that emerge from a personal rereading of Grant Morrison's The Invisibles, which ran from 1994 to 2000. I think September 1994 to June 2000, at least those were the cover dates. Lord knows when the issues actually came out. And I thought this is going to be something of a chronological survey, but not in the form that we've already done. My fellow podcaster Chris has already, with me, gone through issue by issue the entirety of The Invisibles. And I'm not going to do that to you, gentle listeners, again. Nor am I going to do that to Chris. Sorry, Chris. I want to take discrete themes and concepts from The Invisibles and take them apart, look at them closely, see how they reverberate, or resound, or contradict the larger narrative. I want to look at Morrison's sources. Where do these ideas come from? What do they mean in the book? How do they compare to other sources regarding the same issue, external to the text? Just, whatever catches my fancy. And so the first three that I have planned were going to be, even though they're not going to be, I don't know if they'll be chronologically satisfying. I don't know if I will have picked the right sequence in which to tackle them. However, this is where my enthusiasm lays. So I'm just going to follow my enthusiasm as because I am a hotter sort of Protestant. And I want to, so today, I'm going to be talking to you about The Invisibles, Romanticism, and the French Revolution. I already talked about Shelley, and I'm going to talk some more about Shelley here. And I'm probably going to repeat some of the things I had said previously, but I'll try very hard not to do that. And I'll also try very hard not to be drunk. Should be easy because I'm not drinking. It's mid-afternoon. Could be okay, unless someone hits me with a toxic blow dart halfway through this. I should be pretty sober. Then the next installment, whenever that comes out, will be The Invisibles, The Gothic, and The Marquis de Sade. And then I suspect that it will be appropriate at that time to move over to The Invisibles and Voodoo and Jim Crow. And then if I don't know, of course, because I haven't gone that far down the road, but I suspect that after that, I will thereafter, boom, go back to the beginning of the series and tackle the first 4 issues, which I suspect will deal with anarchy and situationism in the Invisibles. I'm not certain of that yet. So this means that I'm going to be focusing on issues 5 through 8, which were released January 1995 through to April 1995. I don't know how much editing I'm going to have to do. I'm really doing this. I've got some notes in front of me. I look like a fucking madman. I am on the floor of the battle shed, and I've got books and papers all around me. And I'm going to attempt to just off the cuff blah, blah, blah at you while still drawing upon the research that I have conducted and the thinking that I have done ahead of time. And trust that as someone who used to lecture for money, that my lecturing for money skills will, although there's no money in this, I assure you, I'm losing money always, because anyway, on any podcasting endeavor, I'm not losing money always, because then I would be poor, and perhaps, not that there's anything wrong with that. Okay, so issue number 5. Now, I'm not going to cover everything in these issues, right? I'm just going to be picking out and grabbing the bits that make the most sense to me to pick and grab out in an effort to, again, just illuminate certain themes and bring clarity to certain ideas, so that way, hopefully, as a reader and a listener and a reader of a listener of this podcast and a reader of the Invisibles, you can come to the series and have a few more tools in your toolbox when thinking about this series. Which, although I don't know, I think I'm always just going to really love it, even though at this point in my life I feel that it has a lot of warts on it. I think that I just can't put it down. And that's just one of those things that ends up happening when you read something as in that particular time in your life. This story, it does not open. It opens up with the Dalang, which we will get to in this conversation monologue. But before we do that, we're going to go back to Julian and Medallo. So Arcadia, Part 1, Bloody Poetry. It opens up with the opening lines. I don't remember, I've counted in the past, but the opening lines of a Julian and Medallo, a conversation, which is Percy Bysshe Shelley's poem. It was conceived of around 1818, August 23rd, 1818, based on a conversation that he had with Lord Byron. He was approaching Lord Byron in order to talk, I think something about marrying an underage niece or some shit like that. I don't know. Byron's a fucking piece of shit, so far as I can gather, and Shelley's a piece of shit too. But he, in this story, definitely, I don't know, there was some sort of talk, but it doesn't, so they're in Este, in Italy, him and Shelley and Byron. I'll call him Percy, because Mary Shelley shows up, and he finishes this around 1819, and this puts us in a very particular time frame. It is around, what do I have it here? Time frame is in Este prior to Clara's death. Clara's his young daughter. She dies in September of 1818, and that is a topic within this, the Invisible story. But before Willie's death in January 1819. Yeah, so basically we're looking at the fall of 1818, or the winter of 1819. This is a period of intense tragedy for Shelley, and some of it, as we'll see, is of his own devising. So it has the opening lines, and it shows them on the beach riding their horses, Shelley and Byron. And I guess the first thing, no, I won't. I won't say the first thing. The first thing I'll do, there's the Byron and Shelley are having a conversation, and we don't need to do the blow by blow. But so Julian and Medallo is figures the characters of Julian and Medallo. They sort of figure they're two aristocrats having a conversation on the beach, like Shelley and Byron. And in the story, they're talking about liberty and fate and freedom and whether one should be pessimistic towards the future or optimistic or whatever. And Medallo is sort of the Byron figure, and he's talking to Julian, who is maybe a Shelley figure. I mean, they're both aristocrats. Shelley is an aristocrat. He's sort of a radical figure, but he's a rich. He's your typical rich guy that becomes left leaning and doesn't actually do anything, though, and is very much influential through their ideas rather than through any of their actions. Although Shelley certainly tried in his youth, prior to exile from England, to establish associations and really to be political, and at a certain point he fell out of politics. But anyway, in this story, they're having the conversation, and the Medallo character says to the Julian character, "Hey, you remind me, your optimism and your exuberance, it reminds me of a guy who went fucking insane." And they go to the madhouse, and the guy in the madhouse, the maniac in the madhouse, is also a sort of a figure for Shelley. Julian is Shelley, and the maniac is sort of Shelley, but also sort of Tasso and a bunch of other influences. And he's driven mad by love lost and that kind of thing. And it's unclear to me fully how. As I said in my previous approach to this, it's unclear to me how that poem truly has any relation whatsoever to do with the overall story of the Invisibles. I think a close reading of the poem, when contrasted against its use and the themes of the Invisibles, it's a very poor match. But whatever. Let's put that aside. That just explains why later on they're going to go visit a madman. Because the implication here is that these events, this conversation, somehow are the origin, perhaps, of Julian and Medallo. So there's a this is a story about a story, and which is about as meta as it gets, right? And what are these guys talking about? Byron's like, men are sheep. Men are sheep, and you tell them what to do, and you threaten them, and they're going to do whatever you tell them to do. And then Shelley's character is, that there's a drive in men towards liberty, and so we've already got this contrast between this drive in man towards liberty. So there's a move towards freedom. There's something that wants to bust out of the chains, and Byron's like, men will always essentially be in chains, and it sucks. And Shelley indicates that poets are visionaries, and they are to report the existence of a better world. This is somewhat in keeping with what we know of Shelley. This notion of perfectibility that exists. However, it is not. The Shelley that we get in this is, even now more. My opinion is even now more that this is not a useful version of Shelley when compared against the historical reality. Percy as an aristocrat was very much a snob, and poets were for him an aristocratic class whose physiology was sufficiently sensitive in order to access things that the rough laboring classes were unable to access. And so, while it's true that Percy, in his reform schemes, was very much wanting to, there should be less labor and more leisure, and that's one of the reasons he was a vegetarian, because the idea was that you grow all those fruits, and then those fruits and vegetables could feed more humans than a single cow. And so, just from a pragmatic and practical standpoint, although he had some philosophical, I would imagine sort of like Pythagorean ideas about it, but I don't know that for certain. This Shelley, and furthermore, well, actually, I'll say in a little bit. So he's portrayed as just sort of like a pure idealist in this sense. This idea that the poet is the pure idea. And Byron's like, look, well, what's the point of perfection? And he cites something that we're going to get into more as I proceed in this monologue. He cites Poussin, the Frenchman. It shows he talks of a painting with 3 shepherds and a shepherdess in an ideal landscape, the Arcadia of the Greens, and this in Arcadia ego, and in paradise I am. And in this painting, which is a paradise, they're showing there's a grave, right? There's a tomb that they're looking at, and it's meant to sort of represent that even in, or at least as they're taking it, it's meant to represent that even in paradise there is death. And so, like, what would be the point? There's no eliminating death. And so, as a consequence, men are sheep. There's no eliminating death. Utopia is pointless. Furthermore, Byron goes on to say, these utopian ideas that you have. Shelley's like, one day men and women will be equal and free from tyranny, free of God and fear, and we will have helped to hasten that day with our words. So he really feels like the poet he hastens that day with the words. And this is interesting, given what we know, what historians have sort of, and scholars have sort of pulled out about Shelley's methods, what it is that Shelley thinks about politics. And one of the things, so in a book by P.M.S. Dawson, Oxford, 1980, in the Unacknowledged Legislator, Shelley and Politics, here's a quote from Shelley. Society is produced by the wants, government by the wickedness, and a just and happy equality by the improvement and reason of man. And Dawson, emphasizes that for Shelley, the poet is the one who produces want, in the sense that, that is the reason the poet, as that we'll get into a little later. Shelley later in the story will cite, will borrow a phrase from Shelley's Defense of Poetry, which was published 1821, so way beyond, years beyond this, the time frame of this story, this idea that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And this is a mistake. Many people will think of like, okay, the poet is the one who establishes the scaffolding of the future, the one who legislates the laws of history. This is wrong. The poet, is legislator. Back then, it meant representative, delegate of the governed. The poet is the one who speaks to the unacknowledged wants of the people, and furthermore, seeks to refine and expand those wants, but in a way that, because government by the wickedness, the government exists for the purpose of putting down the wicked, and bringing peace and order. And so from Shelley's perspective, you just need to, poets, because they're more sensitive than most people, to the movements of thought and feeling that affect society, they're able to reinforce and refine some of the movements by giving them expression, says Dawson. They guide the general will by expressing it. And so it is not that they're really like, there is a dynamic relationship between society and poet in here, and they are not leading the people so much as expressing the people as they move in order to sort of steer them, perhaps. as their representative or delegate, which is to me is an important distinction, because I think it's very easy to establish to imagine a different relationship between the poet and society, and I think one that is more in keeping with Morrison's Invisibles, and why it is that Shelley is a really good figure, actually, in at least one way, for the Invisibles as a project. Because think about this. There's another quote from the unacknowledged legislator. Shelley's purpose in Prometheus Unbound is to enlarge our imaginative apprehension of the world to such a point that we can see that acceptance is neither necessary nor desirable. And I think another, and here's another quote that speaks to this. The world must be transformed in imagination before it can be changed politically, and it is here that the poet can exert an influence over, quote, opinion. This imaginative recreation of existence is both the subject and the intended effect of Prometheus Unbound. Perhaps the themes were too classical. Perhaps the themes were too big and Neil Gaiman-y to tackle in something where Sandman is being published at the same time. Perhaps that's a reason. That obvious connection between the Invisibles, the project of the Invisibles, and Shelley is not touched upon. Perhaps it's not. I really couldn't say. Anyway, that was a digression, but I was hoping it would lead me to indicate that the dynamic nature between the poet and society, and Shelley's not a fool in the way that I think Shelley is depicted. I think Shelley was a bit of a fool, I suppose, in reality, and some of the events depicted here, sort of reinforce that. But Shelley was well understood the reciprocal or circular relationship between this anarchy and despotism, this desire for absolute freedom, which maybe that's fair. Men will be equal and free from tyranny, free of God and fear, and we will have helped to hasten that day with our words. He was a Republican. He had this idea that a federation of small city-state republics would be the best, a la Athens, would be the best course of action. I suppose maybe sort of Rousseauian in that way, but he's not naive, and he is. He understands that revolution, and the French Revolution in particular, is a really bad way to go. Like Godwin, his father-in-law, William Godwin. He understood that society needs a gradual reformation. It does not need a revolution. Like his utopianism, such as it is tempered. And the poet steers movements and expresses movements and prepares the imagination for new realms of politics. But that's it. But Byron is accusing him of something else, and this story does nothing really to refute that. The Byron character says, "You talk utopia, but there is not one damned utopia that did not set its foundations in human suffering and pain. It begins with fancy words, but always ends in blood. Think of the terror in France, the hideous mountains of severed heads." And then later on he'll, and then we get some of that Shelley's imaginative preparation, where this idea that we deny our own divinity, broken to the yoke of religion. We forget who made us our burden and set it upon us. Did Blake not say the mind-forged manacles? Gods and devils make terrified infants of us all. We must do away with them and stand up tall. Be all that we dream of high, majestical. And then, Byron's retort is, some have different dreams, and the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. So there's, there's much that, and I'm repeating my earlier complaint, there's much that could have been expressed that was not expressed. There's much that
there is nuance that could have been captured. And I understand that this is a morality play. And furthermore, as I think that will become clear, I don't think this is a real event. I think whenever we time travel, and I'll get into the mechanics of this, and I often spoke about this when Chris and I were going through a chronological survey of the series. I think Morrison's a bad historian. End stop. And we'll see that in a moment when we start talking about the French Revolution and the Terror. However, I have a theory that will allow us to save the appearances, so to speak. And so I'm not going to demonstrate that yet or argue for it fully. I'm just going to sort of state dogmatically that I believe none of the things in the French Revolution, the Marquis de Sade, anything that happens, or later on when they go to the 1920s, none of that stuff actually, quote unquote, happens. It is time travel is travel into fiction. It is fictional characters traveling into fiction, which shouldn't surprise us, right? What gives the impression to the reader that perhaps there's some sort of quote unquote reality happening here are some of the nice sort of bits of historical touches, the allusions, but everything's jammed together and mashed together in a way that is that does violence to the historical record, but makes sense in a sort of dream logic. So okay, let's get back to now. This Byron thing to me is, I just think is so important. This idea of the fancy words, but it always ends in blood. Think of the Terror in France. So the Terror in France is a series of violent repressions which occurred at the behest of the revolutionary government in France from 1793 to 1794, supposedly under Maximilien Robespierre, through the making use of the guillotine and all that stuff. And later on, throughout the story, we're going to skip around to, how is the French Revolution depicted in this story? Well, we're gonna come back to the Julian and Medallo, and we're gonna come back to the Madman and all that stuff. But before we do so, we need to talk about the French Revolution here. So the Invisibles, our main characters, King Mob, Rag Robin, Fanny, Dane, aka Jack Frost, and Boy. They are sent. They've gotten a message that they have to go back. And I don't know who they got the message from. There is the sense that there are leaders to the Invisibles. There's some sort of ruling, some sort of directing authority that sends them on missions into the past. And I think that kind of falls through later. They become much more self-directing. But in this, King Mob doesn't really have... And the Invisibles, sort of ironically, do not have their own really self-directing agency as they're going to have later in the story. But anyway, they time travel through a method which, in our third episode, will be elaborated upon when we get to the Invisibles and Voodoo. But for now, they show up, and there is the first thing we see is the guillotine cutting off some dude's head. And he's crying, and in green pastures he leadeth me, the quiet waters by, there is no death, there is no death. And dude's head gets chopped off. Clack! Famous last words. Welcome to the revolution, Jack. And that's at the end of, is that at the end of issue 5? Oh man, that's a pretty full issue. So at the beginning, issue 6, we get our French Revolution issues. Now, I'll say that how do I begin talking about the chronology here without getting lost? We cut to this guy's head getting cut off. We see the crowds going crazy. We'll talk more about those in a moment. And the Invisibles, our main characters, they come across our their contact. They have a contact that they're meant to get in touch with. And speaking to the contact tells us two things, right? It tells us that there are thousands of bodies. 1,000 people are being guillotined every month and their bodies dumped in deep ditches. The zinc tubs, which catch the blood from the scaffolds, are also emptied into these pits. If there's clay in the soil, blah, blah, blah. And it tells us that. So we're in the quote unquote the terror at the present moment. However, it also tells us where are we? I believe it is earlier that the guy tells us, that the convention began voting last night on whether or not to execute the king. Meanwhile, I've heard that the guillotine is being moved to the Place de la Concorde, which leads me to believe that Louis's fate has already been decided. I believe that's Louis the 16th. I believe that's the case. This is Louis, as the king has attempted to flee the revolutionary government, which has taken the National Convention has decreed, the revolutionary government, and is held under house arrest and attempts to flee because there are Austrian forces waiting to perhaps take back Paris, but is recaptured, and they decide that they're going to execute him. So the problem that I immediately see with those two little data points is, like, the king has not been executed yet. The king was executed in January of 1793, right? The beginning of the year. But the terror as such doesn't begin to occur until March or April of 1793. I mean, that's just the beginning of the problems. I mean, the sort of mass executions that supposedly are occurring at this time are not, they're largely occurring on the outskirts, they are, for the most part, against, to my understanding anyway, largely against, worries about foreign infiltrators, suspects is the phrase. But, and this guy, he's, every second person in Paris is an agent of one secret power or another. I thought I understood it for a while. I thought we, the Invisible College, were pulling the strings of the Jacobins. The Jacobins are the revolutionary government. Well, it's all gone to hell. In these days, it's hard to be sure who is working for whom. Double agents, triple agents, agents who can't even be described unless you're a professor of mathematics. It's not winter. It is not winter time in this. So like time, it's all mashed together, right? Like, if you don't think about the chronology and you don't know the history, then it just washes right over you. You're like, oh, I don't actually know what's going on, and so you just sort of accept it. But once you know, you can't unknow it, and so then you have to decide. Do you condemn the story for its lack of historical accuracy, which I'm not going to do, or you have to save the appearances, which I'm going to do, but not yet. I just thought that I would point that out. So we open up. One of the things I want to argue now is that, so this fundamental, this opening conversation between Shelley and Byron, and this transition to the French Revolution is Marx Grant Morrison's thought as that of a typical Cold War liberal. This is a typical Cold War liberal view of revolution, as depicted here, and it is to be expected to be the case. So what first of all, what do I mean by this? One of the things that Cold War liberals did in the 40s and 50s, and by Cold War liberals, I'm thinking, like Isaiah Berlin, Karl Popper, Jacob Talman. You can read about this process, and I encourage you to do so in Samuel Moyn's newest Liberalism Against Itself, Cold War Intellectuals and the Making of Our Times. Sort of explains how very slowly the concepts of utopianism and revolution and then thereafter Marxism and sort of economic criticism of material social conditions was excised from liberalism, And like obviously those concepts didn't disappear, but they disappeared from the mainstream liberal discourse. And so you became the thought was that every revolution produced it all begins with fancy words and it ends with heads on a pike or whatever. Like it was a repudiation of the concept of perfectibility, to put it one way. That is what I want to argue that's what Morrison does, and I don't know if I'm going to hold to this opinion throughout this ongoing sort of thematic analysis of the Invisibles, but I suspect that I will, because I've read the whole thing, right? I might as well, so if it is a repudiation of all those things, and it is like a Cold War liberal intellectual, like a Cold War liberal intellectual, it thereafter, as a consequence of repudiating revolutionary action, repudiating utopianism, it thereafter hews towards the market. Like neoliberalism, as we understand it, comes out of this stew, and this too is described in the Liberalism Against Itself book. Although you can find this information anywhere else, but it's just a really nice read. It's very, very, to me, I don't know whether it's accessible or not, but it's accessible in terms of readability. What do we got here? So it opens with, and actually it's a very strange sort of opening, and you can see this. Well, okay, actually, sorry. What are some of the views that the Cold War liberal would have, right? And I turn your attention, ladies and gentlemen, to a book called "You Say You Want a Revolution," which is also the name of the first Invisibles collection, which is, or I think it was just "Say You Want a Revolution," Radical Idealism and Its Tragic Consequences by Daniel Sherratt. This was published by Princeton in 2020, and I just couldn't help myself but get this book when preparing for this series. So it's a book basically like how repressive revolutionary extremism, that's a quote, develops, and we can turn to page 10, and basically 4 stages. There's 4 stages of revolutionary transformations according to this view, this Cold War liberal, this or what is now mainstream liberal view of revolutionary processes. So radicals come to power. The old regime is incompetent, creates chaos. Moderate liberals are prominent at first, but they don't grasp the situation and they fail to quiet discontent. 2, how a repressive apparatus is built up and becomes permanently institutionalized. Counter-revolutionary civil war, or a threat of one, or fabrication of this danger allows radicals to increase repression. So the French Revolution in this thinking is at first moderate, and it is, but they fail to move fast enough or to quell the mob, and but who can access the mob and wants to move really fast are the radicals. And so the people, not understanding that they need to actually be brought to heel, it is very much a sort of people are fucking sheep argument, that even might be appropriate to Shelley. So the radicals come to power and they increase repression. Then thereafter there is a radical utopianism. The ruling party's idealism leads it to refuse to admit its program's limitations, so repressive violence becomes necessary to carry it out. And then finally there's a gradual slide into corruption. So they even refer to it as the Thermidorian reaction occurs sooner or later. And the Thermidorian reaction in the French Revolution is like post 1794, once Robespierre is executed by the guillotine. Thereafter, there is a repressive, a revolutionary government remains in effect, but as is argued by Michael Baird and Marissa Linton in Terror, the French Revolution and Its Demons, the concept of the terror is an invention by the post-revolutionary government to distance themselves from Robespierre. So they distance themselves from Robespierre, but they retain the same apparatus of terror, of quote unquote terror, that existed previously. But they say, no, there was a reign of terror and it's all done. And, like, we're still going to disappear people from the street and stuff. And then gradually they slide in towards corruption. The relaxation of revolutionary momentum opens the way to corruption, repressive institutions, etc. So anarchy to despotism. Despotism fosters anarchy. This cycle goes on and on. This is in a nutshell the liberal intellectual, Cold War liberal intellectual view of the revolutionary process. And as we'll see as I continue, this is the view of Grant Morrison in The Invisibles. We open with the tricosis, I don't know how to pronounce that, the knitters, the furies of the guillotine. And here, so there's three women, they're knitting. Click, click, click. And so I never really kind of noticed this before. So people would show up to the scaffold of the guillotine. And for those who don't know what the guillotine is, it's a machine. You put your head in it. You don't do it on purpose. Someone puts your head in it because you've been a bad boy. And then they drop an angled blade on your head and it fucking cuts your head off. And you're dead. And this was considered to be... Actually, yeah, here would be an excellent opportunity for me to tell. So one of the sources of Morrison's depiction of the guillotine in this story is somewhere around me here, is a book called The Guillotine and the Terror. So there was this idea of a prior to this, one of the reasons that historians Michael Beard and Marissa Linton argue that there was this, one of the reasons because people don't look closely, and I'm not saying people are fucking sheep and they're stupid. It's just who the fuck can look closely at the French Revolution? Who has time for it? Historians. That's their job. However, because if you look very closely, or if you don't look very closely, you'll hear things like terror is the order of the day. Someone I think Saint Just, who was Robespierre's right-hand man, I think, said that in some sort of speech, and this is pointed to as the terror. The terror is the order of the day, and there's going to be this terroristic apparatus. This language of terror is, first of all, there's no the terror. There's just a bunch of repressive actions that are, that are contingent and not directed in any sort of systematic way. It's very complex regarding regional governments and surveillance committees, and no one. It's not like something like the Holocaust, where it was, and even the Holocaust is in many ways sort of ad hoc, but is more of an example of massive state planning in order to repress and execute individuals. The French Revolution is, they use the guillotine a lot. That's for sure. And the reason they use the guillotine a lot is because prior to the, what did the king do? The king used terror as well. Terror was a very important part of monarchy. You instilled terror in individuals to expiate sin, to maintain, just to maintain authority and to represent the justice of God. But, this terror was much more like they would draw and quarter people, hang them. It was always spectacle. It was always so. It was putting people's heads on pikes and stuff like that. And the guillotine promised to be rational, cold, clinical, and in line with the ideology of the revolutionary government. And Morrison makes a lot of use of a book by Daniel R.S., The Guillotine and the Terror, translated by Christopher Miller, Alan Lane. It was originally published in France in 1987, but was translated into English in 1989. And it is a chance to like we said, so there's still the element of spectacle. People show up around the scaffolding to see the execution of the individual, but it's not the big show that you used to get. Foucault in Discipline and Punish, or Surveil and Punish, is that makes a lot of talk about this, and how punishment is hidden. I don't recall. I believe there's talk about the guillotine. There would have to be, as a sort of rationalizing of punishment, but at the same time as this rationalization of punishment is occurring, like there's more prison sentences, workhouses. The quote unquote justice system is being modified at this time, and this is a reflection of that. And the guillotine is the symbol of the revolution. The guillotine, officially described as the sword of liberty, replaced summary popular justice, giving it a procedure and a form of reason. The guillotine had long ceased to be an auxiliary of justice, but actually represented justice in all its moral and political glory. And here it gave substance to the rhetoric of the revolution. And I should say that in this opening bit, it shows the or slightly later, it shows the execution of Madame Roland, who gives that famous deathbed speech. Where can I find it? What crimes are committed in the name of liberty, and that occurred in November of 1793. So again, that's another date that things that occurs like even after the summer. So what is it? Is it January? Is it March? Is it November? What year are we? What month are we? We know what year we are. That's explicitly established. But anyway, so later on, Morrison will quote a lot from this, like when they give the quote of some of the songs, Saint Guillotine, protect our protectress of patriots, pray for us, etc., etc. Kindly machine, have pity on us. Admiral machine, have pity on us. This is quoted from page 74 of this Guillotine in the Terror book. And this, there's daily meetings around the scaffold. It's become sort of religious. Some people refer to it as the Red Mass, and that's on 73. But what struck me, so as people are sitting around the guillotine and the furies of the guillotine, they're watching. They are the Furies. They are the three sisters, and because there's three women, and there is popular paintings of these knitting women. They became symbolic of the revolution early on because they led essentially riots, food riots back and petitioned the king and back in 1789. Way before the terror, and they would show up in the National Convention. They were a bunch of loud, rowdy women wanting change. But what strikes me about these women is, one, they are the three weird sisters, the Furies. This is Gaiman territory, Sandman. They're silent. They're silent as they knit. Two of them are knitting. One does not. To my, we do not see her knitting anyway. We can see a string going up to her. And there's some sort of idea of fate. And let's read what's written here. Furies of the guillotine. Scissor click of knitting needles as the tireless blades fall and fall again, and blood atomizes in glassy winter sunshine. These are the women who cry loudest at the tribunes, howling for vengeance, for more blood, for more and more executions. The tribunes, I don't think they existed yet at this point, by the way, if it's January. Razor hags of the Republic. It's 1793, the first year of the terror. Well, yeah, but not till fall, or not until spring. Wooden needles shuttle and lock, shuttle and lock, knitting together the red threads of capital H history. There's this sense that, and again, this gets to this Cold War intellectual liberal, a historical process is occurring here, and in a world historical process that is guided by the fates, the three fates. Look, a secret pattern emerges, and in the absence of the old gods, new prayers are offered up to the patrons of revolution. And this is, this is fine. This is poetic. You want to say these things, fine. But it's so of the time. So the Cold War liberal intellectual vision was, it existed. But I'm not so certain that it was popular within the history of the French Revolution until I would think the work of Francois Furet and his interpreting the French Revolution. So here, around this time, think about this. Here's a quote. This is from, again, Terror, the French Revolution and its Demons. So there's a surge in this concept of the terror. People aren't even really talking about the terror prior to this. I mean, it comes up, and it originally shows up in history books in Jules Michelet's History de la Révolution Française, published from 1847 onwards. So it's a mid-19th century concept that basically reiterates the post-revolutionary the Thermidorian reaction, their attempt to sidestep their complicity in the quote unquote the terror, and so the historians they pick it up, and they pick it up. It gets picked up again. Another surge, still more spectacular, came with the bicentenary of the revolution in 1989, an anniversary that coincided with intense historiographical controversy from historians of both left and right over the meaning and nature of the revolution. Thus, the terror as a unified and reified entity is a creation of historians, a polemical construct based on antagonistic interpretations, a means for historians to obsessively denigrate this revolution, or indeed any revolution, right? And so Morrison's just, he's just taking it. They're just, they're trapped in the ideology of the moment. And The Invisibles is just another expression of that historiographical debate, which is occurring at that time. Then we go on. We got Mary Shelley coming through. We'll put her aside for a moment, but that's another instance where time makes no sense. Mary Shelley, if I'm Frankenstein, she was not associated, her name wasn't on the it was anonymous at first, is my understanding, and her name didn't end up on it until I think it was 1821 or thereabouts, the 1820s, something like that. And supposedly we're in 1818, right? And the guy, our chess player, aka Satan, aka whatever the fuck you want to call him, he supposedly recognizes Mary Shelley as the author of Frankenstein. And her response should have been, one, first of all, how do you know my name? Two, how do you know that I wrote Frankenstein? Nobody knows that, or very few people know that. Anyway, she's on her way to. I might as well use this as an opportunity. So this Cold War liberal view of revolutionary process, this idea that even in paradise there is death, that utopianism is there is this reciprocal relationship between utopia and despotism, or anarchy and despotism, it's figured within the story in a number of ways. So one, in the form of the French Revolution, which I'm primarily talking about here, it's in the form of Arcadia, but also in the death of Shelley's child, and Shelley. Percy Bysshe Shelley is calling Mary Shelley to Este in Venice. Little Clara is getting sick. Little Clara is depicted as getting sick. And Shelley's like, "Oh, Italy's really great. Come on, get here now." He's anxious. He wants to bring them to this glorious place. And it brings about death. And it's also, we might say, prefigured or figured in the form of Frankenstein, this monster that Dr. Frankenstein's monster. You create it, and then it is it walks and it is a horror of its own. However, that's a bad figuration if so, but it is an idea that occurred to me. It's more like the Boris Karloff or I don't know, the movie version of Frankenstein, not the actual Book of Frankenstein, which is quite complex, and I don't know if there'll be an opportunity to really speak about that. And then also, the reason there's two instances when the Burghers of Arcadia, that painting by Poussin is brought up, the In Arcadia, and the first one is in a postcard that is sent to the Invisibles by Orlando Zippe Totek, and that too is Zippe Totek is a I'll have an opportunity in the future to research more and know more about Aztec gods when we get to Apocalyptic. I believe that's what that story's called. We'll just have an excellent opportunity to go deeper into that sort of mythology. But for now, I understand Zippe Totek / Orlando to be a sort of a god of like fertility and rebirth and death, and a cyclical sort of history, and also with war and destruction and that kind of thing. I have that written somewhere, but Lord knows if I can find it. So we go along, and there's and when we get to I think in the next installment, perhaps we're going to have some more to say about what role enlightenment and reason plays into this. The guy leading the Invisibles, our King Mob, and all those people through Paris in this supposed terror. Reason sits in God's vacant throne while we celebrate the red mass of Saint Guillotine. People are mad. There, above the intel, so they're looking at the Cathedral of Notre Dame. See there, above the lintel, death is asleep forever. Heaven is abolished, and in its place they're promising utopia on earth. Jesus, how many heads must we strike off? How big must a mountain of corpses be before we can glimpse utopia from its peak? And there's Byron's basically theme. That's the Cold War liberal intellectual theme. Like what does utopianism bring you? What does this notion that there's this historical that one can enter into history and change it drastically without beforehand controlling the mob? You're going to have all this. You're going to have all this death. So then we're going to cut through the Cyphermen and Marquis de Sade. We'll leave that out. Madame Roland is her head is cut off. Yes, here we go. Okay, here's more of here's something else. Another situation where Morrison's borrowing in a really interesting way. Like this, when I found this in the book, I was like, oh man, that's so cool. Here, it's on page 174 of the deluxe edition, but this is issue 6 still, I believe. Yes, but we're getting to almost at the end of it. 1. The guillotine as the prototype murder machine. Yeah, there it is again, right? So the guillotine, which is a symbol of the Republic, a symbol of the Revolution, is the prototype murder machine. It is the Holocaust, right? Mass execution turned over to the bureaucrats. The living and the dead totted up as credits and debts in an accountant's ledger. The shadow of the scaffold cast across the 20th century. It's just like it's so in line with all of that. The French Revolution and Robespierre equals communism and Stalin, and that's the formula which guides so much thinking at this time, and that Morrison has failed to escape. 2. The division of head from body, the head of state struck from the body politic, democracy of the blade. Holy royal blood, sang rail. This ties into the Poussin thing, and which hopefully I'll get to that. Spilled in plebeian straw, staining souvenir handkerchiefs and envelopes, talismans, rhetorics. 3. The theater of morality. Disgruntled crowds called for more spectacle. So again, the crowds, right? The people can't be trusted. They're not in control of themselves. The instant amputation remains invisible. The moment of death unrecordable. The lightning stroke across the shutter. The blue-edged photograph. The severed head becomes its own frozen image in this portrait machine. And 4, the final script, the actors, final performances, famous last words, Madame Roland. O liberty, how many are the crimes committed in thy name? And then 5, le tricosis, I really should have looked up how to pronounce that. Sorry, the knitting people. The neck bared, the weighted razor poised, mysteries of the guillotine. So everyone else is jeering and shouting, and those women, and actually the youngest one is knitting, and they're so silent, and they're just watching, this world historical process unfolding. And so let's go back. Amputation remains invisible. Here's a quote from Guillotine and the Terror. It was immediately clear that the extreme rapidity of the process, a feature so commendable in the merciful eye of the law, made it all but invisible. The rational guillotine cheated the spectator. At the height of the terror, it was to become one of the chief reproaches made against it, and certain refinements were introduced to prolong the spectacle in exceptional cases. People want to see it, right? And it's kind of anticlimactic. You come up there, and you don't get to watch a person hang and shit themselves and scream and cry. They get up there, and maybe they're sad, or maybe they'll give a speech, and but what strikes me in Morrison's formulation is this association of call for more spectacle, right? This is it's straining. This is a straining to associate the French Revolution and the so-called Reign of Terror with modernity. This idea that the people are controlled or somehow like. Just that the spectacle is required. Just the use of the term spectacle, and like once we get to conversations about situationism and the spectacle and what all that means and how that perhaps plays into this, I think that it is. I think that that's a significant use of that term, and I think that the spectacular element of the guillotine is worth noting, and. Yeah, O liberty, how many are the crimes committed in thy name? Like that too fits into the Cold War liberal view that you find in works like you say you want a revolution, the radical idealism and its tragic consequences never fails, and you got the Statue of Liberty standing over there, right? It's all, and the script. The actors, final performances. This is part of an ongoing drama, of an ongoing historical drama. It's all there. And then, so when faced with all of this, Clara has died, and Percy Shelley is sad. You're talking with Byron. Your cynicism has been vindicated. I stand revealed as a naive dreamer, always talking of changing the world, yet unable to see what lies in front of me. There is like, there's like he appears to have been sort of defeated in this, but not so much. But like at the end though, the book does want to offer a way of escaping from this inescapable historical process. One of the goals of the Invisibles is to, and this too, this is in keeping with Shelley, but not. Whereas Shelley was in reality a reformer who understood to an extent the pragmatics of politics, and wrote. I believe that there's a quote in Prometheus Unbound where I'm writing this book, not to give to the children of aristocrats because they're the ruling class, and I need to change their mind, and so that way the existing power structures can be slowly altered, because I don't believe that revolution is valuable. Whereas, and as we've seen, like Shelley holds that the poet expresses movements. And what we get here is something a little different, where, Percy's talking with Mary Shelley, and she's very sad, and, he's like, I've always been a vain man, and so she says, poets have a right to vanity and pride. They steal the power of creation from the gods. They remake the world with words, and in the image of their dreams. And that's kind of an allusion to Frankenstein there, maybe too, the power of creation from the gods. But they remake the world with words and in the image of their dreams. And no, that, that's not what Shelley's poetic self-conception is, looking closely at the defense of poetry and any other, like, letters and even also poems. It's Morrison's sort of misunderstood, and really wants to big up the poet. There's an important person here. Like, The Invisibles here is a work that, although it takes a supposedly nuanced view of revolutionary processes, and it's and it wants to remake the world, but the Invisibles doesn't remake the world so much as it wants to undo the world. And so how does these stories, these opening issues, how does one escape the tragic consequences of radical idealism while retaining one's radicalism? And finally, now we can go back to the very beginning of the story with the Delang. I would like to argue that it, and I'm not quite sure what this amounts to. I think that Morrison in The Invisibles has a frankly, and I intend to expand upon this as we go along, an extremely naive view of how one, and which probably flows from their attitudes towards magic and mysticism, and is largely informed by it. But there is, and even their own religious convictions. But ultimately, the goal is to see that the drama of history is just that, a drama, an illusion, the Delang. And what do I mean by this? So anyone who hasn't read this in a while, the opening pages of Bloody Poetry, Arcadia, Part 1. We're going to a shadow play. And there is a book on the history of shadow play that I haven't read. So if there's something deeper here that I could be uncovering, I'm unable to. But so there's two brothers fighting and the two shadows. And it's the story of the, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Mahabharata is the story of a big fight between the Pandavas and the Kauravas. And see how each has his own movement and way of speaking. This is the work of the Delang. Very clever man, very skilled. That's the puppeteer, right? Ah, yes, the Delang. He makes the voices and moves the puppets. He directs the Gamalian musicians. His job is to make us laugh and cry. Very clever man. The Delang is more than a puppeteer. His skill makes us believe that we see a war between two great armies, but there is no war. There is only the Delang. Anarchy and despotism, light and darkness. These two things, they don't exist. The implication here is that one has to understand that there is a drama. There is someone, but it's being directed by something. We see this also when they go to visit the maniac, when Julian and Medallo go to visit the maniac, and the maniac is playing the piano and saying, like, one hand plays the white and black keys. There is the one hand behind all of it. And similarly with the chessmen that we see later on. Later on, we find the person who was speaking with Mary Shelley in the carriage and recognizing her when he really ought not to have recognized her. We find this individual at a church, and it is René Le Chateau. You must have heard the story. So he's playing chess out in front, drinking wine, and it's in France, yeah. And then there was a man, a priest, and Rag Robin is there, named Berenger Saunière, who came here 100 or so years ago. Perhaps you've heard of him. And so this is the main story of a book called The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, which was Michael Big Ant, Richard Lay, and Henry Lincoln's book. When did this baby come out? I saw so many people fucking reading this when I was a kid. Published in the UK in 1996, but it would have had to have come out before then. I think this is a later edition. Came out originally in 1982. Right. Okay. So I have a version that is sort of updated, but ultimately it is the argument is that the Burger, the In Arcadia painting by Nicholas Poussin, it is sort of like it's part of it's a code, right? Louis XIV wanted this painting specifically. It had secret information, and it is held, according to quote unquote researchers in 1970, that the background, so in the painting, in the landscape, it is the landscape that is associated with this René Le Chateau, or 6 miles from René Le Chateau, which is a church and it was sort of a hint as to where one could find the secret, right? And it turned out to be the secret of the Grail. It turns out to be that Christ's bloodline was maintained and associated with the French royal family. Blah 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 blah. I don't know. I didn't read the fucking thing in full because it is about 400 pages of, like, as an historian, it's fucking, this really gets me, particularly since it goes out of its way to whitewash the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is historians have categorically demonstrated that it was not only a forgery but an amalgamation of diverse texts that we need not get into. And one of them, Montesquieu and Machiavelli in Hell, which I think was from the 18th century, and it's just sort of and it takes all these ideas, and then it makes it about the Jews. And so what this book says, well, it's not about the Jews, and it's not a forgery. It's based on an original document based on the Freemasons. And so simply for that fact alone, this book can go fuck itself, because it's just whitewashing pure and unadulterated anti-Semitism, which has done untold damage. Not this book in particular, but the Protocols of the Elders of Zion are so fucking fundamental to eliminationist racism towards Jews in the 20th century that just this book can go fuck itself. As a matter of fact, this is going to be my thing. Anytime I get a chance to tell Holy Blood, Holy Grail to go fuck itself, I'm absolutely going to, and I think you should as well. Anyway, Morrison overlooks that particular problem with the book, and, whatever, perhaps they didn't read it, and perhaps they didn't give a shit. So then Rag Robin goes inside, and they find the head of John the Baptist, some sort of Frankenstein type creature, attached to all these gears and servos and the engine of prophecy. So I don't know what to make of the fact that it's the head of John the Baptist. Like it says et in Arcadia ego underneath. And so this is this is what was inside the tomb. This is what, I don't know, something beyond. In the original painting, it's one of the figures is thought to be the figure of history, the figure of art. When history comes into the world, death is introduced. And I don't know what that has to do with anything, but this thing's speaking in tongues. And Rag Robin figures it out. It's just like that, it's just saying a bunch of things, and the Cyphermen, the bad guys, attack, and she's incorporeal, and they can't attack her, they can't hurt her, and she realized that it's just a thing that goes blah 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 blah, and you hear what you want, or supposedly what you're supposed to hear. And later on, she goes outside and she talks to the chess playing man, and he's like, "Okay, so you figured it out, right? And she says, "Is that it? The treasure is a new language?" And the chess playing guy, he's like, "Not new, eternal. Glossolalia is the language of ecstasy and dreams, the primal tongue of fire. It is the original voice of the unconscious mind." So, like, the original voice, the Dalang, the hand that plays the piano, the hand that plays chess. And everyone who hears it interprets it differently. Everyone hears what they need to hear, right? So there is the sense that in order to escape the revolutionary process, one has to understand that your part, you're hearing what you need to hear, which kind of implies that the violence of the French Revolution was both preordained and necessary as some sort of attempt to, I'm not quite sure yet. I feel what we're gonna see later on is that it's some sort of chrysalid state, as we prepare to expand our consciousness or whatever. The unconscious speaking directly to the unconscious, invisible speech. What kind of world would we make where such a language would be the common tongue? I'm planning to be around. There's this idea that this invisible speech, once it's recognized, once one sees one's role in the drama, one can wake up from it. And this is this is sort of reminiscent of what Morrison has Shelley say. He's very sad, and Byron has disappeared at this point. Byron is not going to go off and die in the Greek Revolutionary War for quite some time. I don't think he will have done it by 1819, because this book, this is prior to the death of William, because we see William. I'm pretty sure that I recall that being the case, because Mary's gone to go talk to Shelley. Anyway, forget it. Whatever. Or that happens later. Yeah. Shelley's already had his little revelation based on his conversation with some sort of ghost Byron, and the woman takes, standing with Mary Shelley, takes little William. So William's not dead yet, but William will be dying soon. Even my imagination, you chide me, George. I cannot stop talking to the future. I have so much I must say to the unborn, suffering multitudes. I know where utopia lies. It is here, and he's pointing at his head. Where is the love, beauty, and truth we seek but in our mind? The golden country forever new, the home of all hearts untouched by time and pain? Here. Waiting for us to grow up and recognize it and come home. Right? So all this drama and sadness or whatever, it's all an illusion, and there is a utopia, and it's all within the mind. It's all within consciousness, man. It's all, and once one realizes that it's invisible speech, that reality is invisible speech, and unconsciousness speaks directly to the unconscious, one can grow up, right? It's all, there is this biologic, evolutionary language at play here, which manages to sort of skirt the language of revolution. It is a gradualism based on a biological metaphor, which is always very dangerous. And I think that Morrison is foolish in employing that particular metaphor. I think the New Age movement in general is imprudent in engaging with those metaphors, but nonetheless, that's what they do. It's a slippery slope between that sort of thinking and all the right-wing shitheadery that we often see. And so that's, and then finally we get this tapped off back to Percy Bysshe Shelley. We get the lines written on the Euganean Hill, and it is an extended poem which was sort of sparked by the Peterloo Massacre. And also the death of his child, the Peterloo Massacre being exactly what it sounds like, a massacre in Peterloo, of like a revolting mass of individuals, an attempt at a sort of, I suppose a revolutionary action or a riot that was put down by the repressive government, and so he's in a really bad mood. He's sad, and he just imagines that there is a place, beyond suffering, where the earth grows young again. Every sprite beneath the moon would repent its envy vain. And it's for this reason So what do we get out of all of this? We get a story we get a major story in which the French Revolution is emblematic of the dangers of enthusiasm and utopianism and, radical idealism and its tragic consequences. And it is this way because it's participating in a current of thought that flows out of Cold War liberalism. And now I know that Morrison is not an American. These tend to be American thinkers, but these are highly popular and influential American thinkers who have cachet in Europe. And so there's this idea that, don't be too radical, man, because it'll just produce violence, and the violence turns to repression, and it's just blood and blood and blood. You got your bloody poetry, right? And ultimately, the only escape is to view all reality as the illusion of invisible speech, of the unconsciousness. And so, later on, I feel I'm certain that I'm going to need to tackle the millenarian enthusiasm, which marked the December 23rd, 2012, or whatever the fuck it was, the turning of the Mayan calendar, this idea that the world was going to end in 2012, this millenarian theme, this idea that there was going to be a true end of history, and that too is a Cold War. Is a form of Cold War intellectual liberalism, which with Francis Fukuyama and all that, there was a real sense in this time, 1994, and this, I suppose these ideas would have been germinating in 1993, like the Cold War has come to an end, and it must have really seemed as if history would come into some sort of end, and this sort of millenarian ideology was, it had a moment, and I mean it still exists in any given time, but it was particularly popular. And Morrison too is wrapped up in that, and The Invisibles really is dated for all these reasons. And I do think that is important. One shouldn't be surprised that a 30-year-old story is dated, but what's the purpose of an historian or literary critic or whatever the fuck you want to call what I'm doing right now is to point out how it's dated and to see these individuals trapped in these ideologies. And what I would like you to do, dear reader, is to keep these things in mind reading Morrison's work into the present day. I don't have any reason to believe that any minds, any of their element of their mind has been changed over the intervening years. And if anything, it's just sort of they formed it. They're trapped in that particular manner of acting and listening to them. I'm subscribed to their Substack because I like to. I'm always going to be curious what they're up to, although it's a very disappointing Substack. I do not encourage anyone to get involved. You get a lot of questions answered, but a lot of reading a lot of those questions answered, you don't really get a lot of meat unless you're looking for comments about their superhero comics, or a lot of people who just want to say like, man, The Invisibles is really fucking awesome. And then Morrison sort of agreeing with them. It's not as bad as that. I'm being a dick. So that is the Invisibles and Romanticism and the French Revolution, a thematic exploration. I don't know when the next installment in this project will be. I'm hoping to make it sort of monthly, but as you can see, and perhaps guess there's a lot of reading that goes into this and sort of a lot of forethought, and but I am done the War Journal, and so I'm hopeful that I'm going to be able to continue this project in slow motion. And I'm going to have to kind of think of a tagline, but for now, I want to thank you for listening to my ramblings. I hope that I managed to make sense. I hope that I'm able to edit out any of the flubs that I've committed. I guess you commit a flub. Flubs that I have made, flubs that you have heard, flub sounds of flubbing, Flub, 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 flub. I kind of want to end this like I usually would end the War Journal, with some sort of thing, but I don't have a thing. So I'm just going to say thanks, and I'll come up with a thing for the next time. And I don't know. I hope you're well. I hope you find utopia without bloodshed.
Now all we need is a little energon and a lot of luck.